compare myself with Rawls. I think personally the weakness of his theoretical paradigm, however, was the attempt to think and concern yourself with the individual, right? The embodiment, our embodiment, my physically being a man, my physically being from a destitute, poor background, my physically being black, my physically being urban, informs who I am, and I could never think like a white woman. Not knocking it, but nor could she think like me. I couldn't conceptualize a state of affairs where I was a white woman. Personally, I don't like those, but I can think about systems, and so can the white woman, and we can both think about systems. So that the idea is when we recognize the limitations of, and I don't think there's two P's in appeasement. I don't even know how to spell it, but we'll just put AP, right? Attempting to appease our constituency in order to preserve power that we've already attained, we recognize that that undermines a broader social awareness, right? We're talking not just about appeasing the concerns of the demographic that puts us in position of power. We're talking really, when we talk about political, not government, M-E-N-T, but political governance, which you're going to have to put on your smart caps to figure out what I mean, because I'm not going to say it. We need to think about governance setting is to limit our ability to govern. Very dense, but, you know, I got a smarty pants population of people who watch my videos, so read between the lines and figure that out. Okay, so that's that. Next bit is political problems as a consequence of practical functionality. So the first thing is, a breakdown between the political establishment and the population has immediately three possible explanations, right? This fracture in political ability to work, to govern, right? And the idea, and I don't want to get into that, but I just don't want to talk about that publicly. But just think about what happens when governance breaks down. Just think about how bad that gets with people like me, right? But my doppelganger bad guy version, right? My doppelganger bad guy version with the same sort of recognition. Think about what he's doing right now, waiting for destabilization. Oh my goodness, it's crazy, right? Governance needs to be in place, right? I mean, I'm a fan of big government, and you might not be. That's cool. This system, my system, isn't informed by my belief that I believe in big government. You believe in small government. You still need to understand the nexus of relationship between the social and the political. That's undeniable, right? So a breakdown between the political establishment and the population has immediately three possible explanations. First, internal, right? Intrastate, within the state. State in terms of sort of the complex of interests, right? Intra-complex of interests, to be sort of technical. So intrastate conflict, primarily based on conflicting interests. So in a very sort of hokey sense, no, actually this is advanced, so I'm not going to do a hokey sense. The idea is that internal to state governance are mechanisms in place that facilitate conflict intrastate, right? There's inherent conflict between those aspects of the state that govern and regulate in terms of law, the legislative branch, if you will, and those modalities within the state that infer social grievances that inform those laws, right? And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk about this in the next section. So let me explain the next section, and then I'll give you an example. So internal and external, like a dynamic. Conflict completely internally, conflict externally. And this is not just like beef with somebody on the Hill. You're a representative A from, a Democrat from, state A. You're a representative Republican from state B. You guys got beef. It's obviously not that mundane. Maybe the ideology of conservatism versus the ideology of liberalism, generally speaking, is more representative of sort of internal conflict, but we'll see it gets even deeper than that. So part two, external socio-political conflict, which is what I do, either based on identification of the population's recognition, right, the recognition that the population has. I don't know how deep I'm going to get into this. It's the political that's making a recognition, though, of the state, of the population's recognition. So either based on an identification of the population's recognition of potentially threatening interests. The population recognizes that the conflict of interest internal to the state could adversely affect the social. It's not you think about that, right? Think about how complex that is, right? It is a recognition in the population that the internal conflicts to the state can bleed out and adversely affect, externalize itself, right? Think about that. The recognition within the populace that, the potential recognition in the populace, that the internal conflict of the state could, in a quote-unquote, bleed out and adversely affect the populace, right? Or the recognition of adverse governmental intent. Remember, intent, not interests, right? This is a demarcation that I want to make so that we're exact in our language, right? Not in terms of bill, in terms of law, right? Specifically in terms of law, which could be codified to keep the alignment out of balance. The example is crack laws versus cocaine. This was overturned, I think. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. I don't really care. But the idea is, you know, you had equal amounts of the actual narcotic, cocaine, which can be made into crack, however you do that, or is just raw coke, right? If you get caught with, you know, a gram of coke, my understanding, I don't know that this is true, but my understanding is that you get caught with a gram of coke, you do less time in jail than if you have a gram, and I don't even know if that's enough, right? But to get high on, I'm sure it's enough to get high on, but, and if you get caught with like a gram of crack, you get more time. So, gram of crack, you get more time. Gram of coke, you do less time. The scientist, and I don't mean the social scientist, the biological scientist is saying, the hard scientist is saying, look, it's a gram of coke, right? There's a gram of cocaine in both. So if there's a gram of cocaine in both, as objectively, undeniably true, and we recognize that the prison incarceration, blah, 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 sentencing, whatever the judiciary people call it, is disproportionate, the question is, well, why is it disproportionate if we're talking about objectively exactly the same thing? Well, surprise, surprise, black people smoke crack, white people, and this I'm generalizing grossly here, right? Black people smoke crack, black people smoke crack, white people snort coke, you know, okay, well, you know, that's an interpretation. Whether or not that interpretation is valid doesn't really matter. The idea then is, and this is the point, the idea then is that the incarceration of the crime cannot, I want to say this super slowly, and I think this has already been overturned, but this is the idea, right? The idea is that the incarceration based on the crime cannot be objective. By definition, it is not objective because objectively speaking, scientifically speaking, we're talking about exactly the same amount of narcotic. So we must recognize then that there is some subjectivity that is informing this disparity in incarceration. And where does that subjectivity come from? It comes from the social. It comes from the social. Now the implication. Now the implication. We start sort of PC, but it gets, think about this. The political then, and the social, the idea has traditionally been, and I don't think there's many people in the world, that professional academics who are teaching at university, such as myself, will agree with me. Liberals, I doubt they, you know, there's, you know, this is what I'm about to say is a pretty ridiculous claim, but you know, it is what it is. Obviously, I support this because I'm saying this publicly, right? And something like this, usually I keep my more sort of radical beliefs to myself. It's always been the case that we viewed the political as a threat. I mean, everybody says that. Oh, the political's a threat. The political's a threat. Oh, the political's a threat. The political's a threat. Okay, sure. You know, I've read a billion books about that. Everybody and their mom has written that book. I'm really tired of reading that book because, you know, I don't want to get too cocky here, but you know that story's been done. And I'm not saying we should stop doing it. In fairness, right? You're always gonna have cases